Hey, thanks, and a special thanks to Fats, to Tally, to the folks who keep the flame going here at Nellis. And Fats, you know, you made a comment that Dylan Mosley gave you the charter some time ago in terms of what it is that we're here to do. Let me tell you what I think we're here to do. Produce confidence under fire. And I'm going to just share with you just one story on how it played out personally for me. And to tell you that not only will I not miss a web tack, but you can also know this, you're not going to find a bigger man. Because for me, the way it's played out, and I'm not the only one in the room, you know, I'll talk about day one of Desert Storm, where the vast majority of us as an Air Force, I mean, we hadn't fought since Vietnam, there was nothing really on the horizon, and we all walked across the stage and we held up our right hand, and all of a sudden we find ourselves going to war for the first time. And I'm looking at a room of combat veterans. We're the most combat-proven joint force on the planet. But had I been talking to some folks early in 1990, I would have looked at an entire room of folks who had not been to combat, and we sort of all know what the great unknown. You sort of wonder, how am I going to do it? Am I going to let my buddy down? Am I going to be able to perform the way I'm trained, right? And so there we were on day one, going across the line, and we had one guy in the squadron who was a combat veteran from Vietnam, and he was our squadron commander. One each, Lieutenant Colonel then Billy Deal, mid-kill, Vietnam. And so he takes us across the line, and we're all 40 of us in F-16s going across the line. And oh, by the way, I got to tell you that this is actually a fun part of our culture. As a Viper guy, the Eagle guys had gotten to the KAOC and built the ATO and assigned all the call signs to every one of the formations. And somehow all the F-16 formations were diseases. So now I have to tell my grandkids that I flew into combat as Drip 05. But I was doing better than Cyst flight and Boyle flight. Nice work. So we go across the line, and first thing we hear is our squadron commander goes, "Hey, there's AAA right 2 o'clock." And 40 guys in formation all the time. Well, holy shit, that's AAA. All right, I got it. And then he calls out SA2 left 10 o'clock, and we all look, and there's a telephone pole coming right up through the formation. It explodes up above us, right? And then because I was far enough in the formation forward, I hear splash, MiG-29, and I see a fireball hit the deck. And I remember that moment in my cockpit. And what I remember is confidence under fire. Because what came over my cockpit as I realized, hey, you know what? This is not new. I've heard these radio calls. I've seen these formations. I've seen AAA simulation. I've seen Smoky Sam's. Hadn't seen a guy hit the dirt before. But everything else was actually something I'd already done. And so as I talked to my buds afterwards, every one of us felt the same way. We realized, okay, we got this. We can go do it. And we went in and crushed him. And so confidence under fire, I think, is what we get out of our workers. And so you can expect that I'll be the biggest advocate for that over my tenure as chief. Because we never want to lose the flame as we go forward. All right, so let me also say, build on something General Wolter said, or about don't talk Carlisle here. Obviously, the Mutual Appreciation Society, but when the history is written of air combat command, they have the icons, right? The General Russ, the General Creech. Right next to that will be General Carlisle. And I just want to say that I just pray that I look half as good as you when I get to be your age. So when you go to General Officer Charm School, and they tell you about talking to big groups, and they say, listen, what are the things you don't want to do? You don't want to start off with an apology. And I'm going to break that rule because I can apologize. Because it's hard to say, but I don't have any PowerPoint slides. What I have are some ideas. And so what I want to do is I want to share with you my thoughts as your chief on the future of combined arms. The future of joint warfare and our role in it as a member of the joint team. Because every one of us that takes a leadership responsibility, whether that be chief or a squadron or you name it, we are not paid to tread water in that job. Our job is to take whatever we're given and make it better. So what I want to do is just share with you some ideas that I have, and I'm not here to tell you that I may have them all right. They're just my ideas as your chief, as a function of all the experiences up to this point, of what I believe the future fight looks like that we got to prepare for, and how we go about that over the next 3.5 years. So here's the attributes of future warfare as I see them. Number one, it's going to be trans-regional fight. Damn, our enemies are not paying attention to our combatant commander maps. Russia is not a EUCOM problem. Russia is a EUCOM, PACOM, SouthCom, CENTCOM, NorthCom, TRANSCOM, STRATCOM problem. And so we need to think as a force that provides a large part of the global capability for the joint force, as a member of the joint team. We got to be thinking about this fight that's coming our way as a trans-regional fight. And how do we get in the business of being chess masters and not be just in the business of checkers? And here would be the example I would give you. When Russia pressures us from the east, are we thinking about pressuring him from the west? I would argue that that's checkers. Linear point, counterpoint. If Russia pressures us from the east, are we thinking about how do we simultaneously pressure him from the north, from the south, from the east, from the west, from all domains, creating so many dilemmas as a global power with global relationships, many of them which are in this room. That's the chess master. And we've got to think about how we contribute to that dialogue in a trans-regional campaign. The second piece, I think, is that I do believe it's going to be multi-domain. And when I talk about multi-domain, this is all domains, right? Air, land, sea, space, cyber, subsurface. If we as airmen don't think about that domain, we're going to forget about it. Especially when it comes to tying it together in the sensing group. When I speak about cyber, we better be thinking about social media and how we sense the globe in all of these domains. And as the service that brings together a lot of the analytical rigor throughout our DGS that turns ones and zeros and datas into decision quality information for leaders, we've got to be thinking about a fight that's multi-domain. And then if we can create effects from those same domains, does the ability to be able to produce simultaneous dilemmas for the enemy at a speed that they can never respond to create its own deterrent value in the future? And how do we think about that as a force? It's going to be multi-mission and multi-component. And how do we as airmen ensure that as we develop leaders of the future, that when we walk into the room and we've got the tape that says U.S. Air Force, there's an automatic expectation that we understand the operational art of integrating air, space, cyber with the other elements and the other domains and the other components and our teammates to produce a joint campaign plan that leverages the strengths of all. And so it's going to be multi-mission and multi-component. It's going to be combined. When we take a look at our strengths as a nation, I would argue that our ability to build and sustain coalitions is one of our greatest strengths, and it's one of our enemy's greatest weaknesses. You name me Mr. Putin's allies and partners. Belarus? You name me the President of China's partners and allies that he can marshal. If Mr. Putin is going to be paying attention to what we do, it's going to be because he has the combined military and economic might of 28 nations that are acting together. So the future fight is going to be combined. And while some may lament the fact that decision speed goes to those who are who are a command of autocracies, where you can make quick decisions and you have internal lines, in a protracted campaign that is always a liability. And so we as a service have got to think about our position and our role in the building and sustaining of partner air forces and air components, and how those air components fit into a broader campaign. And the last attribute I would share with you in terms of the future of combat is it will be faster than anything we've seen in the past. The reality of warfare in the information age is it will be faster than we've seen before. And so the victor in the future conflict, in my personal opinion, will be that individual, that commander, who can command and control his or her forces, produce multiple dilemmas at a rate, and from so many domains, and with a resilient capacity for fires, that understands the business of global chess and deny the adversary the ability to do the same. That will be the victor. So that's the attributes I think of future warfare. Trans-regional, multi-domain, multi-component, combined, and fast. And so as I look at our Air Force, and I look at what the time that I have as your chief and where we're focused, the question becomes, where are we, where we need to go? And so there's three areas that you've heard me talk about. And I want to walk you through them a little bit. And I did, by the way, think back on what were the best keynote speeches I ever heard when I was coming here, sitting in these seats right here. And I will tell you, the ones that I love the best, the person yapped for about 15, 20 minutes max, and then we had a dialogue. So I'm hoping we're not going to stare at each other for about 45 minutes. But I'll also tell you that what tends to happen when we get to these seats up front, right, and you get these, right, is it's a funny thing. What happens, all your jokes get a lot funnier, right? That's a joke. But the other thing happens is that people tend to tell us what they think we want to hear. And you got to have staying power. So I'm relying on you all that we're going to have a good, honest old debrief here, right? And if I'm missing the boat, that we'll have a good conversation, and you can help refine my thinking, refine our thinking as we go forward. So I call these my big rocks, or focus areas, chief focus areas, because they're big and they're heavy, and it's going to require every one of us lifting together and shoulder against the wheel to move them forward. And they ought to be worthy of a chief's time, and they ought to be hard and combined together. When I stitch them together for you, here's what they equal. They equal joint warfighting excellence in the 21st century. And that's where you're going to see me stay laser focused for the next 4 years. So the first one, you saw a paper on it. Give me a head nod if you saw a paper on revitalizing squadrons across the Air Force. Okay. So why squadrons? Because to get where I think we need to be, there's key elements to this, right? There's an organizational element, there's a ConOps element, there's a leader development element, and there's a technological element, and all four of these come together with these three big rocks. So the first one is organization. It is my personal belief that culturally, as an Air Force, the most important level of command is at squadron command. I mean, we are not the service that will stand up culturally and say we're airmen before we're everything else. I mean, we are the great insurgents of 1947. Sad day. Yeah, that's right. I've used that line before. I've called us jihadists, and I said that doesn't go very well at all. Right? But the reality is, here's my belief. When airmen get through pipeline training, they join a squadron. When we want to build readiness, that happens in a squadron. If we're truly going to be innovative, that happens at the squadron level. If we're going to succeed or fail as an Air Force, it's going to happen at the squadron level. Where's the culture of the Air Force reside? It's at the squadron level. Where are you going to have the most impact on an airman's life? It's being the squadron commander. And so when I look at the organization within our Air Force, that we can have the most impact in terms of not only the people, our great airmen, but also, equally important, the the mission that we're all paid to perform for the joint force as a member of the joint team, it's at squadron level that we can make the most impact. And here's my assessment of what's happened to squadrons over time. As we've gotten smaller as a force, we've had some pretty significant growth industries. ISR has grown, space has grown, nukes have grown, cyber has grown. We've had growth industry. So if the money's coming down and you have a mission growth in certain areas, you got to find a way to balance the books. And what we've done over the past 15 years for sure, and I can go farther back than that, is our bill payer has been people. If I'd been speaking to an Air Force as the chief in 1990, I would have been talking to an Air Force of just shy of 1 million active guard reserve civilian airmen. Just shy of 1 million. Today I'm talking to a total force of 660,000. You do the math. So what happened over that time as we were coming down? Well, like we do, we made some decisions, because once we became so small in certain key areas, we had to consolidate and pull people out of the squadron, consolidate and move them up to higher levels. There was a point where we were actually moving intelligence out of the squadron, y'all remember? Right? We took commander support staffs. I remember when I was a squadron commander, I used to yell out to my section commander, right? They're gone. So we had people that we moved out of the squadrons, but the duties remained. And so in truth, so think about that. If in fact this is the most important command element of our Air Force where we succeed or fail, then I want to take a laser focused view the next year and say, what is the status of our squadrons? I will tell you right now, we have over 2,000 different kinds of squadrons or squadron-like organizations in AFMC in the Air Force today. Over 2,000. Okay, think about that. Oh, by the way, I can point to a squadron that has 40 people, and I can point to a squadron that has 1,400 people. And everywhere in between. Okay, so if you got 2,000 squadron commanders, you got 2,000 DOs, you got 2,000 superintendents, you got 2,000, you start up doing the math, that's a lot of people. And so we're going to take a good, healthy look at what constitutes a 21st century squadron. I can go across all the AFSCs represented here, and I can tell you that when we built the UMD for your squadron, we did not intend for you to have 20% of your squadron always gone. But that's the new normal. Most personnel recovery squadron commanders will never, in their command tour, ever have their squadron all. 6 months on, 6 months off, 6 months on, 6 months off. They will never get their squadron together. That UMD was not built for that. So it's time for us to step back and take a look at squadrons and get them healthy again. And we're also looking to remove irritants and get decision authority back to where it belongs. Because I'm concerned that as people left the squadrons, decision authority started moving up. Today's wing commander has 1,148 different AFIs that he's got to understand when the IG rolls in. 1,148. I'm thinking at some point he just sort of hit the I believe button. Right? And most of those, and many of those, are prescriptive in nature. And I'm not one to legislate common sense. So we got to push decision authority back down to where it belongs. We trust squadron commanders with the business of our United States Air Force. We entrust our squadron commanders with the most powerful weaponry on the planet. So we can trust them with other things. We're taking a big swing at the computer-based training, additional duties. We're not where I want to be yet. I'm here to tell you. But we took a hard swing at it. Because I do believe that we have gotten to a point where the amount of training we've laid on the force and the amount of additional duties we've laid on the force are not improving our readiness, they're actually reducing it. And so we're going to take a good close look. When it comes to CBTs, I have a daughter that's an airman, and she keeps me grounded, right? So she has a great quote. She says, "Hey, Dad, listen, I don't know what hell looks like, but if I ever get there," she said, "here's what I know for sure. Without question, here's what I know for sure." She goes, "I will have to file a voucher on DTS to get out. And I'll have to do 60 hours of computer-based training just to get out of hell." That's actually not bad feedback to have as a new chief. So we're going to keep swinging at this. So read this focus on squadrons. Now here's what I hope. This is one of those big rocks where hopefully success will beget success. That we will start getting momentum. Because quite frankly, we're going to have more impact on squadrons not at the chief level and not at the MAGCOM level. It's going to be at the wing and below level. Because there's some of this that we got to think about culturally. When is it that we identify someone who has the potential for the most important level of command in our Air Force? And then what do we do about it? What's the developmental path to ensure that someone actually has all the tools that we can give him or her to succeed in the most important position they're going to have? How do we treat them when they're in command? If this is in fact the most important level of command where they can have the most impact on their organization they'll ever have. Do we toss them in the pool and see if they can swim as a test for the next level of command? Or do we stay engaged with them the entire time because we're invested in their success? And so we're going to have to take a look at this, but here's the beauty of it. All those who have been a squadron commander, show of hands. Okay, look around the room. All right. So let's see, you can put your hands down. Let me see if you agree with me. It is one of the greatest gifts that we can ever give in our Air Force, to be given the opportunity to lead at the that level. And if you get it right, the gift will continue for the rest of your career. Because here's what happens. You get an email on average one every other week from somebody out of the blue who will check in with you and say, hey boss, been tracking your career and just wanted you to know I didn't appreciate the Article 15 at the time. But I'm doing okay. And I'm a master sergeant now. And I kept the kids. And I really appreciate you giving me the financial counseling I needed at the time to help me get out of debt. And I will tell you, for all of those of you who are going to be squadron commanders, when you stand up and take command, it's a little bit overwhelming. And it's that way for all of us. But when you give up command, and you're standing there and you're looking out on that formation, you'll see faces. Every face will have an individual story, and there will be a life that you've impacted. And so we have got to get squadron command right. So that's big rock number one. Okay, big rock number two. Strengthening how we develop joint leaders and teams. So what are the global challenges that we face as a nation? China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, violent extremism. You may have heard us talk about them in the Joint Chiefs as the 4+1 framework. 4 global challenges that are state on state. One that's a condition called violent extremism that from my perspective extends from the Philippines to Nigeria and all the undergoverned spaces in between with potential to expand. I predict there's a chance that we may be going to a 4+2 strategy. I'm one that believes that we got to have a lot more discussions about the transnational criminal highway from the southern border that's bringing everything from drugs to weapons to you name it into the homeland. And so when you take a look at those trans-regional challenges, the question becomes, what kind of leaders do we need to develop to be able to ensure that not only are we able to contribute and provide air-mindedness, but also be able to lead those campaigns if and when called upon. And oh, by the way, let me give you a little visual here. If anybody's walking away, because I don't want you to walk away thinking that we as Air Force or as Airmen don't build great joint leaders. Let me just give you a little visual. Lori Robinson, Darren McDough, John Hyten, Paul Selva. We're doing just fine. The question is, though, if you go back to what I believe is the nature of future warfare, what kind of leaders do we need to develop in the future as we strengthen our leader development? And so we're going to take a look across how we develop. And it's going to be from initial, first shows up, raises the right hand and joins our Air Force, all the way through till the point where now we're competing them for joint leadership. And the question is, how do we develop joint leaders along the way? And I believe that we no longer have the luxury as a service of growing up in one domain and then being exposed later in our career to the operational art of how they combine. When we walk into a room, all of us, have got to be able to understand to the operational level integration of air, space, and cyber, and then how to integrate that into a larger campaign that brings in the land and maritime domains as well. Because these challenges of the future that are trans-regional in nature, that are going to require global chess masters, are going to require our voice at the table. And so we're looking at how long we have in a career to develop these kinds of experiences. We're looking at how many commands do you have to have in a career, because what tends to happen for us that we're going to take a healthy look at is, by the time you get to a certain point, the 12-year point, and now you've got to command 3 times, go to 2 schools, get a staff in there, try to get a joint chap, right? We end up all of a sudden in a sprint. And ladies and gentlemen, that's self-imposed. So it's time for us to take a step back and take a look at what does that joint leader of the future look like, and how do we proactively develop them along the way. When I say strengthening joint teams, there's both a larger JTF aspect to this, but there's also a presentation of forces and how we as an Air Force present forces to a combatant command element to this. Because what's happened over the last 15 years for a variety of reasons is we've gotten to the point where the average UTC deploying to downtown to join combat is 1 airman. I want to repeat that because that's important. The average UTC deploying downrange is 1 airman. And we know better than anybody else how to have that 1 airman come join a team, right, that's in motion and then get quickly spun up. But I want you to think about that from an organizational perspective. And when I go out and I do all calls, this is a little older crowd, but I will tell you, when I go out and do all calls and I show for a show of hands and I say, okay, how many of you deployed to your first combat experience as an individual? And I will tell you, I get upwards of at least a quarter, sometimes half the hands go up. So we as leaders have got to think about what that experience feels like to a young airman, to a young officer that's going into combat for the first time as an individual. If they have a pretty good unit deployment manager, they probably got, reasonable gear going in. They had someone that helped them get their transportation. They got their training completed. If they didn't and they were on their own, they're going into the great unknown with all the stressors associated with going into combat as an individual. And then they do great when they're downrange. But then I want you to think about the backside. Now I've had a significant experience, and I'm redeploying back home as an individual. I'm an Air National Guardsman, and I'll go back to my main operating base. And I've had this significant experience in combat. Who do I talk to? Who do I relate to? And the answer ought to be my teammates. And so we're looking at how do we deploy as teams. We will never be the service that stands up and says, hey, you want an airman? You get a squadron. Or you want an airman? You get this kind of a, that's not who we are. Sometimes the right answer for the joint force is I need 2 C-130s to go downrange and do this business. That's part of the flexibility of what we bring. But we've gotten so flexible that I'm concerned that we've busted up team, how we deploy it. So the way this looks in the future, and Carlisle is leading the effort on this, but we look at what does a team size look like? I do know it has a few elements to it. It has a team leader that's responsible for the team. They train together, they deploy together, they stay together when they are downrange, and then they come home together. And they don't disband as a team until the team leader says we're good to go. Because I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, my personal opinion, we are 15 years into at least a 30-year war. We got time to get out of this. And when it comes to joint presentation of forces, the JTFs, the reality of this is that if you go back and look historically at JTFs, joint task forces that are stood up, on average, historically, it's been 6 weeks from a crisis to a stand-up of a JTF. 6 weeks from crisis to stand-up. And we have an obligation to the nation and the joint force to be able to contribute when there's a crisis with a JTF capability. And so I use the Ebola example as an example. When the Ebola crisis happened, the reality is, based on the nature of warfare over the last 15 years, we as a service, Navy to a certain extent, because I've talked about this with the CNO, we walked away a little bit from JTF capacity from within the service. So we're going to rebuild this back. We're having a lot of discussions now on exactly what this looks like, how much of this we can get at, but I will tell you that there will be spin-off benefits to this as we go forward. And the spin-offs will be as we build JTF capacity within our Air Force, and we start using the lexicon of a JTF, and we start using the battle rhythm of a JTF more and more as part of our daily battle rhythm, it automatically makes us more ready to contribute when either we present forces or we're asked to stand up a JTF. So strengthening joint leaders and teams to ensure that we as a service are stronger when it comes to our contributions to the fight. And the last one is multi-domain command control. You haven't seen that paper because I wanted to let Salty Saltzman have a dialogue in the C2 conference this week. He'll come back and we'll refine it. You'll see that coming out in the next few weeks. So I learned from a guy named General Mike Ryan, if you want anything to succeed, you got to have 3 elements for success. You got to have a single person in charge. Committees won't do it for you. You got to have somebody that drives to work with the rose pinned on them, that knows that they're accountable for success. The second thing you got to have is you have to have a plan that's written down, and it's got to be more than PowerPoint deep. It's got to be in English with minimal number of acronyms. It's got to be concise. It's got to be clear, and the organization's got to be able to understand it. And then the third thing you got to have is a plan that's placed on a calendar with key milestones and metrics and decisions, because you improve what you measure. And I will guarantee you, for all of you who have had this happen to you, there's a little code that happens, right? When you give commander's intent, and you give it a couple months, and the team comes back and you ask them, how you doing? And the code really goes like this, hey sir, we're working on it. Let me tell you what that actually translates into. I guarantee you'll find that either nobody was in charge, somebody else thought they were in charge, nobody understood the plan, or more often, life got in the way, a crisis built, and there was no follow-up mechanism to make sure that you kept things on track. So in each of these 3 big rocks, there's a single general officer that's in charge. They're laying out the plan that's now being populated across the force. We're placing that on a calendar for this year, and we're going to stay relentlessly focused as we drive this home over the course of this next year. So multi-domain command and control, sensing the globe in 6 domains, like I talked about. Creating effects, being able to act as a global chess master in ways that brings global capability. And to do that in a way that you can also deny your enemy the ability to do the same. And to build resiliency in your command and control so that if something is taken away from you, as we ought to expect will be taken away from us, then our answer ought to be, bring it. I got 5 other domains that I can take at you. And we ought to be ready for this, because I will tell you, it confirmed, as his CFAC, General Mattis very clearly gave us 2 pieces of guidance when we were component commander. Number 1 was, I expect vicious harmony. Doctrine is an interesting dialogue to start the dialogue, but after that, I expect the component commanders to get together and figure this out. Vicious harmony. And the second thing he said was, and don't tell me you can't fight if you lose your communications and your exquisite capabilities. So if he is confirmed, giddy up. We've been ready for that. So if you think about the way we have acquired weapon systems in the past, most of the weapon systems that we've acquired have been focused on the weapons platform, the truck or the cargo, and we actually haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the network on which that truck or cargo will operate. And the reality is, it's time for us to reverse our thinking. It's time for us to think about the future as the networked approach to combined arms. And everything that rides on the network is merely an app. And some of them fly, and some of them float, and some of them shoot, and some of them collect. And we've got to get to the point where we are acquiring these apps at a rate where we're no longer talking about 20-year procurement programs, but the focus really is on the network, and on the data, and on the formatting, and on the data rights. And so when I talk about multi-domain command and control, it's about achieving decision speed that no one else can match on the planet as we go forward. And I will also tell you that we have to be careful about how we talk about this. Because when you say the word command and control, in some elements that can be a threat. Right? I had this great conversation with my ground force commander counterpart, and he says, look, there are certain things that I require in a fight that are mine, and if I don't have them, always, then I won't plan for them. My rifle is a classic example. It's mine. I sleep with it. I clean it. I sight it. You Air Force guys are never going to centralize and then redistribute to me my rifle. Because I have to have it in every fight, and my life depends on it. So we have to be sensitive to the fact that this is not about us doing command and control. This is about an Air Force that was given this mission in 1947, and this is our obligation to help lead this dialogue as we go forward. And I would also offer to you that it's a natural fit, because culturally, applying a networked approach to warfare is actually something we already know and we get. And the example I would offer you is a personnel recovery event. Now, when I say personnel recovery, you're probably thinking about Chad Franks here at his age 60, coming in to pick up the 117 guys some way back when. That was the end state. But let's talk about what actually happens in a personnel recovery event. Because you're going to see it's air, land, sea, space, and cyber all coming together in a choreographed mission. So the first thing that happens, God forbid somebody steps on an IED, let's say, and the first thing that happens is the golden hour actually starts at the point of injury. And for any of the medical folks in the room, they'll tell you that being able to stabilize the wound and stabilize the patient is probably medically as important as anything else we do. And as soon as that is applied, the next thing that happens is somebody jumps on a handheld radio with a battery about that big. And they're standing in the valley of the Hindu Kush with 10,000-foot mountains on both sides. And they take this little handheld radio and they key the mic and somebody answers from 1,000 miles away. How the hell does that happen? It's magic. I'll tell you how it happens. It's bounced off an airborne layer, the signal is amplified, it's gone onto protected or unprotected ComNet in a constellation, it's bounced across the constellation, it's simulcast to the appropriate organizations that need to hear that. What's the next thing that happens? Somebody jumps on cyber, they get into a Merck chat room and they start typing in what's the name of the individual, what's the blood type, what's the nature of the industry, right? The injuries. What happens next? Somebody in the ISRD starts moving assets overhead, and we start cataloging exactly where's the enemy, where's the friendly, where's the ingress approach, what's the egress approach, what does it look like at the LZ? What's the next thing that happens? Somebody on the chaotic floor normally would grab somebody, make them the airborne mission commander, put a Sandy overhead, sort of orchestrating all the events that we have to have covering fire. What's the next thing that happens? Somebody in the aeromedical cell starts scrambling the CCAT team, the critical care team, and they're loading onto the C-17. That C-17 is launching to a runway. And what I just described for you is a networked approach to warfare. We get this. It's part of how we already do business. It's our job to take it to the next level. So when you take a look at each of these three, revitalizing squadrons, strengthening our build of joint leaders and teams of the future, and leading the effort to strengthen and get to the next level of multi-domain command and control. When I add these three together, we equal joint warfighting excellence. And now as we break for questions and a chance to talk, I will just end with this. I may not have this right, but this is the one thing I can tell you as your chief that I know with 100% clarity. That war is coming, and we have from this moment until then to get ready. And every day counts, and I'm going to need your help.